Bonjour, merci. Je suis ici avec mon collègue et député de Kitchener Centre, Mike Morrice. I want to share with Canadians what I learned from reading the top secret version of this, the special report on foreign interference in Canada's democratic processes and institutions. This is the redacted, available to the public version, which I'm keeping near me for reference now and then. But this is the work of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and they have done incredible work. I learned a lot from reading this. I'm going to read a prepared statement, which is not my normal way of going, but as someone who has obtained top secret security clearance, which is what allowed me to read the complete unredacted report, I want to choose my words carefully, so I prepared some. And then I will be prepared to take questions in English and French. Forgive me, I'll say right now, I usually answer quickly and off the top of my head. You'll find today that I'm going to stop and think. Depending on your questions, I'll have to consider, am I trespassing or coming near the line where I might inadvertently hit a tripwire to a national security issue? So I'll stop and be careful. There are in this report names of MPs. And the MPs whose names should be known, members of the committee across party lines, have done stellar work on a very difficult set of issues. They should be better known and they should be thanked. This is a very innovative thing, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. It's chaired by David McGuinty, includes Stéphane Bergeron, Liberal, Don Davies, NDP, Patricia Latinizo, Rob Morrison, Conservative, Alex Ruff, Conservative, and several senators, Patricia Duncan, Francis Lankin, and Marty Klein. I am in awe of their work, frankly, having read the complete unredacted report. This is not easy stuff, and the work that they did, I do think all Canadians should be aware of their work and thanking them, because they really have to work in the shadows and they have to honor their top secret security clearance. Being a member of this committee has hardly gotten them the limelight or a lot of thanks. This report focuses on a critical issue about which Canadians should know more: the extent to which foreign governments seek to influence Canadian political life, hoping to impact domestic policies while advancing their own country's reputation. Et en français, ce rapport se concentre sur une question essentielle, sur laquelle les Canadiens devraient en savoir plus: la mesure dans laquelle les gouvernements étrangers cherchent à influencer la vie politique canadienne. Foreign governments also attempt to interfere. I'm just going to underscore. The first sentence is about influencing, second, interfering. Foreign governments also attempt to interfere with our democratic processes across national and sub-national electoral politics. Influence and interference are related but different. We need to know more about the tactics and strategies used by foreign actors in both categories, especially when actual interference is involved. The threat of foreign governments working against Canada's interests, attempting to impact Canada, must be a specific and more deeply understood threat, especially for people seeking elected office. Malheureusement, ce travail important a été éclipsé par une tempête médiatique tout à fait compréhensible qui, à mon avis, est exagérée. Unfortunately, that important work has been eclipsed by a totally understandable media firestorm, which, in my view, is overblown. I have been asked many times, in slightly different ways, how it feels to sit in a parliament knowing that there are potential traitors among us. Shouldn't the public have a right to know which MPs have sold out their country for benefit or favor from a foreign government? Having read the full, unredacted National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians report, for myself, I can say, I have no worries about anyone in the House of Commons. There is no list of MPs who have shown disloyalty to Canada. There is no list of MPs who have shown disloyalty to Canada. So I am very glad I read the full report. I am very comfortable sitting with my colleagues. We will disagree on policy and on many issues, but I am vastly relieved. The most worrying case, found at page 26 of the publicly available report, is one referenced instance of a member of Parliament proactively, and that's the, in quotes, in the public document, proactively sharing privileged information with a foreign operative. That person should be fully investigated and prosecuted. That person is a former MP. The few named people may be compromised. They have been beneficiaries of foreign governments interfering in nomination contests. Saying as I do that I'm relieved does not mean that there is nothing to see here, folks, so let's forget the whole thing. There are clearly threats to Canadian democracy from foreign governments. I would like to suggest to all colleagues in Parliament, particularly leaders of the other parties, that we refocus our public statements and parliamentary debates on what steps need to be taken to better protect our democracy. It is clear some foreign governments see Canada as a pretty vulnerable, soft target. All recommendations of the hard-working National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians should be implemented. They have worked harder and have more deep background than any other MP. For myself, I suggest we fortify the binding nature of our oath when we are sworn in as members of Parliament. The Ethics Commissioner should be mandated to work with our intelligence community and specifically be prepared to issue reports where on investigation it is clear the MP has failed to put their loyalty to Canada above any other interest, particularly above personal benefit. This must be extended to the influence of foreign transnational corporations. Those are my conclusions. I'm happy to answer any questions that this statement has given rise to from the journalists here present.
Should the person you made reference to on page 26 be named?
Absolutely. That is, again, the person on page 26 to whom I referred proactively shared privileged information with a foreign operative. There, as you remember from all the coverage so far in terms of the language of the report, there's been these categories of witting and unwitting. This individual was entirely aware of the circumstances and was witting. That person former MP, whose name is not included in the report, should be fully investigated and prosecuted.
Their name's not in the report, though? They're not named in the...
They are not named in the unredacted full version.
Vous avez aucune inquiétude pour quelconque élu de la Chambre des communes? Comment vous expliquez ça là, en termes simples? Parce que dans le rapport, on semble dire qu'il y en a qui ont eu la loyauté. Bon, on questionne leur loyauté.
Oui, il y a un mélange dans le rapport entier. Un mélange des nuances, un mélange de rapports, un mélange de situations tout à fait différentes. Les personnes élues dans les différents gouvernements du Canada, les personnes qui ont cherché un chefferie, course à la chefferie, il y a les exemples tout à fait différents. Mais l'impression était créée que nous avons actuellement un Parlement avec les députés qui ont fait les choses en faveur des gouvernements étrangers et contre le Canada. We have seen the creation of the impression, and I don't think it's inevitable given the kind of accusations that I found shocking. I found myself looking around at colleagues, wondering who could it be? Who would sell out this country? Right? It's disquieting. It was a relief to see in the report that this specific narrow category, and I want to be very specific about it, are there currently MPs sitting with us in the chamber who would set out knowingly to sell out Canada for personal benefit? If there are, there's no evidence of that in the full report.
What about the Senate?
The Senate is, there were no references specifically to the Senate in the report that I read in terms of, no. I'm speaking specifically to the House of Commons and elected people.
So other than that person on page 26, do you know the names of the other parliamentarians flagged in the report?
There are not many names in the report, to be very clear. I've been cautioned every word I reviewed with you just now. I carefully vetted with security experts and got advice from the Privy Council office. One of the areas in which they have warned me I could betray some degree of confidentiality and even potentially expose current intelligence assets of the Government of Canada and even risk the personal safety and physical security of such assets would be by using specific numbers. But I feel comfortable telling you that of other names of people, MPs, be very careful and say members of Parliament, as there are other names in the report of different categories of personages, but of members of Parliament named in the full unredacted report, and I will not give a specific number, but I think I'm safe to say very low number, fewer than a handful, and no one in that fewer than a handful could be described as setting out to knowingly betray Canada in favor of a foreign government.
Having seen this then,
Yeah.
do you think that these names, that there's any reason for these names to be publicly released?
Not at this stage, no. I do think we need better tools. This is why I'm going to vote against the Bloc Québécois motion that I have to tell you before reading this report yesterday I was going to vote in favor of it. I think it's a hot potato. So throw it to Madam Justice Hogue. That's not good enough. We're members of Parliament. We should be able to look at and especially those of us who have the clearance to read the report, should be able to read it, consider it, and start fortifying our own defenses against foreign interference. But no, what's known publicly right now is what can be known publicly. And I really think that we've gone up we're barking up the wrong tree to insist that the list of names of MPs there isn't a list of names of MPs.
Frustrated that none, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Can you walk us through how you got to this moment of relief, though? Is it because the intelligence isn't corroborated? Is it because there's just not enough details? I mean, I think it's like paragraph 164 clearly lays out a list of concerns that NSICOP had about MPs who are semi-witting or wittingly helping a foreign state. There's a list there. So what makes you believe that list perhaps is overblown?
Well, having read the whole, let me just go back to paragraph 164 and make sure. Again, what is contained in the full unredacted report does not suggest, I mean, again, this is the unredacted. The committee has seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. Right? Again, those words are carefully chosen as well. The efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. That's concerning. But when I had previously said to media, if someone has sold out our country for money or for benefit, they're traitors. Participants in efforts of foreign states to interfere is far short of a prosecuting offense of traitors, of treachery, or performing acts that could be considered traitorous, disloyal. Witting, semi-witting, participants in efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. And then again, communicating frequently with foreign missions or during a political campaign to obtain support from community groups or businesses. Now, there are a lot of different actors, and this is another thing that comes up when we read the whole report, for those who get a chance to do so. Foreign governments are targeting not only elected members of parliament, but people seeking election at many different levels of government. Provincial governments are also mentioned in this report. There's also, and I say in the unredacted version, or I wouldn't trespass on saying it out loud now, community groups. That was a surprise to me, the extent to which particularly identified cultural community groups are recruited, and then those groups also seek to create relationships with people who might someday be in a position to exercise some influence over an elected person or a member of cabinet or so on. So again, a lot of this isn't new. I refresh my memory. We've ignored some warning signs in the past. I'll take you down I was going to say memory lane, but many of you would not remember this. The 1983 Leadership Convention, at which Brian Mulroney defeated Joe Clark, it was only some years later that we discovered it was foreign money produced by Karl-Heinz Schreiber to pay for people to show up in generally the anti-Clark camp. That became public knowledge when exposed by the CBC and the Fifth Estate some years later. I was shocked. The idea that some right-wing Germans had decided to change who was leading the Conservative Party. There are a number of references in this report to leadership races in different parties. I think we need to be quite alert to the threats. What I'm trying to say is that we don't want to be distracted in our efforts to better understand foreign interference, better protect our democracy, by the thought that there's a list of MPs somewhere and they're traitors and should be exposed. That does not exist. So, having concluded from reading the full report that there is no list there to be released, the next question is, could the whole report be released? No. There's protected, top secret, security, information in that report, intelligence reports, and so on, that could expose Canadian assets and undermine our security intelligence services. I'm very concerned, by the way, by the extent to which we don't know who still within CSIS sent privileged top secret information to members of the media. There's a mixed bag of a story there. But I need to be very careful. I'm one of the few members of Parliament with top secret security clearance. I'm going to do my best to answer every question as fully, as honestly as I can for you. The whole report can't be released, but if the whole report were released, it would not reveal a list of names of currently sitting MPs.
Back to
There, the
page
names are
26
there.
though, on page 26, did you see which country this person was helping, and can you say?
I did see, and I can't say.
Est-ce que, quand vous dites qu'il y a très peu de noms de cités dans le rapport, est-ce que ces noms-là sont des députés?
Il y a quelques autres noms de députés, oui. Pas qui ont fait les choses comme l'ancien député que j'ai déjà mentionné sur page 26, qui a fait les choses avec connaissance qu'il veut faire quelque chose en faveur d'un gouvernement étranger et contre le Canada.
Il l'aurait
Seulement
fait de
un,
façon non
mais-
volontaire.
Et avec mais l'autre question est, est-ce qu'il y a les autres députés dans ce rapport? Il y a des noms, mais je ne suis pas à liberté, je n'ai pas le droit de donner le nombre des autres députés pas déjà mentionnés dans les médias et dans le rapport public ici. Mais c'est presque, c'est un nombre très petit, et c'est les gens qui sont influencés peut-être, mais il n'a pas fait un effort contre le gouvernement du Canada, à mon avis. That's in reading the full report, the few other members of Parliament mentioned are in the category where even the intelligence reports suggest, I mean, we can go from witting and unwitting to willful blindness. Should they have known? Should they have figured it out? Who was paying for the buses to get people to show up to vote in different contests? That's been going on for years in Canada. As we know, busloads of people can show up at nomination contests. Not Green nomination contests. You don't usually have busloads of people showing up, and we'd sure notice if they showed up and we didn't know them. But, you know, electric vehicles, smart cars, trying to storm a nomination meeting, we'd notice right off the bat. I'm sorry. But busloads of people that you don't know showing up at nomination contests is, I'm afraid, not untypical in Canadian politics. That those busloads of people were paid by Karl-Heinz Schreiber, we know that happened in 1983 with real consequence. So, how much more do we learn from this? Do I think we need to do a lot more as Canadians to pay attention to malign influences of foreign governments? You bet. And I think to focus on that will be more productive than to keep wondering. It reminds me of Joseph R. McCarthy days when they found the microfilm in the pumpkin. I mean, the whole thing. Well, it couldn't remind anybody of that because you're all too young. I was born during the Armin McCarthy hearings. It's not like I remember. But there's a fascination with political intrigue. We can't help ourselves. I'm just begging my colleagues, particularly the leaders of the other parties, not to let this descend into a witch hunt, imagining that there's a list of MPs in the report that someone should disclose. There is no list of MPs.
They may or may not want to take your advice, but would you advise Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Blanchet to do as you have done, get the security clearance and read the unredacted report?
Absolutely. I think a commitment to not knowing something isn't wise whether you're a member of parliament or a parent, a driver, whatever you're doing, I think it's always better to have as much knowledge as you possibly can get of the 360 degrees of your circumstances. More knowledge is better. Being determined not to know, they'll have to answer your questions as to why they're determined not to know. I am so grateful that David Johnson, but for this, I would not have top secret security clearance. Former special rapporteur, an ill-fated mission for a fine man. But if David Johnson had not reported, as he did, that leaders of federal political parties should have access to top secret security clearance, I wouldn't have had access to ask for it.
John Meeting a eu l'accès
Ouais.
au rapport et il a dit hier en Chambre, le premier ministre connaît les noms des députés qui travaillent potentiellement avec des gouvernements étrangers comme ceux de l'Inde et de la Chine. Il contredit ce que vous dites aujourd'hui.
Oui, je comprends. Je ne sais pas pourquoi j'ai déjà lu le rapport secret et M. Singh reste avec sa position qu'il veut lire le rapport, mais actuellement, il n'a pas l'accès. Je ne comprends la situation entre M. Singh et moi-même. J'ai demandé le droit de lire le rapport. J'ai reçu l'aide des membres de notre gouvernement dans le conseil privé. Et hier soir, à 5 heures, dans une chambre tout à fait secrète, j'ai commencé to lire le rapport. So, in contrast to Mr. Singh, who has said he's demanding to read it, he has top secret security clearance, he's asked for access. I take him at his word, he's asked for access. I followed the procedure in a letter that I had received in May from the Privy Council office explaining how someone in my position with top secret security access might be able to access the report, understanding that, and the circumstances aren't the easiest. You have to go to a secure room, leave all your electronic devices in a locked drawer. You don't take in a pen and paper. You don't take notes. So I brought this because it helps me remember what was redacted. So when I start a page like this, it will always have something like this paragraph was deleted to remove injurious or privileged information. The paragraph described how Pakistan has engaged in foreign interference in provincial or federal politics. That's just an example. Throughout the redacted document, you see sentences like that. Help me remember what I read when I couldn't be taking notes at all. No pen, no paper, no electronic devices. But that's as it is. I don't know why I'm sure Mr. Singh will get a chance to read this. But, he said he'd throw anyone in his caucus out if they had experienced foreign interference or been. I think it's important.
Will he have to, and would you?
I don't, look, the answer is because I have just said I don't think there's anyone currently sitting in the House of Commons who's committed acts of foreign interference or shown favoritism to a foreign government over the interests of Canada. I think we're talking about smoke and mirrors and political posturing.
Different types of people are in
that
this
are
report.
named in the report, the MPs where there are names, you're suggesting there are names. There are also instances where there are no names, but stories being told. Should these members of Parliament know that this information exists about them? Should they be aware?
I would be surprised. There's a reference throughout to what CSIS does in terms of risk management. One of the things CSIS does to minimize threats is to brief people who ought to know better. And that's done pretty regularly. So I'd be speculating to say whether they already know or not. I don't know.
They know, based on what you've read, that they should be aware that
Again, due to the specific circumstances of intelligence assets that can't be compromised, I can't answer that exactly as you phrased it. But there are so few additional names that beyond what is already in the public domain, and none of those names would I put in the category of witting operatives favoring a foreign government. I do worry about transnational corporations. I do think it's wrong to take money from a foreign corporation against the interests of Canada. And when a former MP did so, I took that complaint to the Ethics Commissioner, and she said there was nothing wrong with that. So I think that's someplace where we need to beef up our ethics rules, and so that the Ethics Commissioner and Intelligence Services could work more closely together to make sure that our oath of allegiance to Canada, which is expressed as, because we're a constitutional monarchy, it's expressed as an oath to, the one I took was to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. New MPs will take an oath to King Charles III. That should be understood as an oath to Canada, and that's a sacred oath. And when people don't understand that's an oath to be loyal to Canada and think they can fool around and play footsie with foreign operatives in hopes of favors down the road, I think they should be booted out of Parliament. Now, by the way, there's only one way to remove a sitting member of Parliament under our current laws. I'm not going to give you I'm not tempted to do a pop quiz. But here's how. Members of Parliament are the only authority with the right to remove a sitting member of Parliament. Any member of Parliament can move a motion to remove a member of Parliament, and on a vote of all members of Parliament, majority rules, and a seated, elected member of Parliament can be removed. It's only happened 5 times in the history of Canada. 2 of those times applied to Louis Riel. It's not a great instrument. It's a blunt instrument. One could say it lacks due process, even natural justice. It's not clear at all how a sitting member of Parliament would defend themselves. A motion comes forward, and then there's a vote. But that is the only current tool to remove a sitting member of Parliament.
You mentioned in the report there's references to different types of people. You said not just MPs, different types of people. I'm wondering if you were referring to staffers who work for politicians or nomination race executives, and if you could also kind of characterize how many parties we're looking at here. Is it everyone with seating in the Commons? Is there an NDP person referenced, a Bloc person?
The report is very clear that all parties have been targeted by foreign governments. I would say all parties except Greens, but as I thought about it, the fact that we're omitted doesn't mean that we might not be targets in the future, so I'm just leaving that aside. The report in the redacted public version says all parties, so we can take that. To your first question, when I said not just members of Parliament, elected people at different levels and orders of government. So we shouldn't take our eye off the ball there. I think there is much more work that needs to be done in looking at this report. There are other examples of people currently in elected positions in Canada who are not members of Parliament.
Sorry, is their names in the redacted?
Yes.
Okay. And I just also wanted to know briefly what you think of NSICOP's approach here. You talked about this as a hot potato. I'm just wondering, when people are losing faith in institutions, do you feel like they struck the right tone in the amount of information they've released and how they characterized it?
This is very difficult stuff, right? They're trying to thread a needle, which includes protecting top secret information, and it gets kind of like John le Carre stuff sometimes. You think, okay, you've got an actual intelligence asset. Do you smuggle them to the safe house? We don't have a lot of John le Carre going on in Canada. I was saying to my husband last night, because I couldn't tell him anything about the report. I was saying, it's somewhere between, the report makes me think of John le Carre, but it's not as bad as John le Carre novel, but it's a bit more worrying than Miss Marple. He said, honey, no one's going to know who Miss Marple was. You can't say that. So anyway, There are people, in terms of what this committee has done, I think it's extraordinary. I think they did more than a good job. They did a great job, bearing in mind that what they could put out in the redacted version, just as I have self-censored myself from what I know and what I can tell you, constantly in my head thinking, I must not violate the trust placed in me that allows me to have top secret security clearance. So, and I think about all those members, it's a rare thing, but for these parliamentarians, members of parliament and senators, to have to self-censor as they write, and then the public redacted version obviously involve very close coordination with intelligence services of various kinds, CSIS, PCO, the CSE, probably RCMP. There's a lot of delicate balancing that goes on here. And that's why I have nothing but respect and gratitude to my colleagues who serve on this committee and to the chair, David McGuinty. It is not easy. What I do worry about is clear, I'm sure from our remarks here, is that we both take it seriously as a threat. Foreign interference is a threat within the world of domestic politics. But if we're going to address that threat, and I think we must, let's focus our efforts on tools, updated laws, improved resources. Elections Canada, for instance, one of the points made in this report is how few resources Elections Canada has to check out untoward donations and money intended for, that's all in the public report already, of money that came from India and was directed to certain candidates in certain parties in certain areas, but then again they couldn't conclude the people ever actually got that money. To the extent that it's possible for my voice to make it through the noise here, not I mean here in this room, I mean in Canadian politics right now, let's focus on the constructive, positive steps that we need to take to modernize and reinforce the various bulwarks that protect democracy in Canada. Primary, in my mind, is the one that's hardest to reinforce and protect, and that's public trust in our institutions. So I want to focus on the steps we must take to ensure that more people seeking elected office have pause if someone says, I got a free trip for you. Oh, by the way, I think all sponsored trips from any government to any MP should be banned. It's not enough, I don't think, to report to the Ethics Commissioner, I got a free trip. I don't see any reason that a member of Parliament should accept a free trip anywhere from a foreign government.
Do you agree with all the redactions as someone who's seen both?
My opinion doesn't matter. I'm not a security expert. I might not have changed some of the words the way they were changed or the nuances of how they were changed. But again, everybody who did that work knows a lot more about it than I do.
Should they have known that even referencing MPs was going to cause a problem without a plan to figure out how they were going to solve for that? And by they, I mean like NSICOP and also the Prime Minister, who also would have seen the unredacted version of this report, knowing full well what was about to be made public.
The extent to which they're buried in top secret documents and reports, the review of whether, again, looking at random sentences in the CSIS's assessment that candidates were unaware of the source of the funds, and again, the different kinds of cases that are, they're often, they're not that many of them, but specifically references case studies. They all have different nuances and they all have different contexts. So as you can tell, I'm loath to criticize colleagues who've done this much work. It's easy to be, in hindsight, more of attention on communications, but the pressures that this committee was under to produce a report and attempt to assist our institutions protect themselves. I mean, there's a lot that got through in the unredacted version. There's a lot that got through into the redacted version, the public version, that gives us plenty to work on. I'm concerned that PMO didn't immediately take the recommendations from the committee and implement them, as an example. There's a lot here to chew on. Whether the focus on a non-existent list of MPs who've betrayed their country is lurking in a document that people won't reveal, and that's really unfortunate because I don't think anyone intended to create that impression. I can't see why they would want to create that impression, and there is no list of names of MPs who have consciously, deliberately sought to sell out Canada to preference another government.
Can you tell us about the page 26 allegations? Did that MP, the former MP, receive any benefit? The one you're saying that should be, prosecuted. Did they receive any benefit from that foreign government? Was it?
It's enough that they wanted to deliberately. Let me just make sure I'm sticking with what is in the public version. A then member of Parliament maintaining a relationship with a foreign intelligence officer. The member of Parliament sought to arrange a meeting in a foreign state with a senior intelligence official and also proactively provided the intelligence officer with information provided in confidence, and I'll just read in what's intended here, provided in confidence to the MP, a then MP. As I said, this is a singular example unlike any other in the report. There is no other example of an elected person at any level of office deliberately seeking out a foreign government's intelligence officer and proactively providing information. Did they receive a benefit? That's not something I can speak to, but on the face of it, it's outrageous, and that should be prosecuted.
Is it acceptable to you that this is only coming out now if it's a former MP?
Well, I don't know when. It's who knows when they knew, right? It takes intelligence gathering is not my forte. So but I think that now we know. We don't know the name. We don't know the person. We do know that that's an outrageous example, and I think prosecution is appropriate on the limited knowledge of facts I have from reading the whole report.
Do you know if they're asking about sponsored travel? You just mentioned that should be banned.
Yes.
Is this, are you specifically talking to a reference in the report, or
No.
why did you say what you said then about sponsored travel?
I've never accepted a sponsored trip from a foreign government. I see a lot of people taking sponsored trips, and I'm not at all. This way, I don't want to judge or condemn my colleagues. Almost every MP I know and that I respect has taken sponsored trips. We know which governments offer them most often, and I don't think they offer free trips to visit their country without expecting that they've at least influenced the MP a bit, that their country is one to be a friendly country. We don't mention anywhere in these documents, by the way, some countries aren't referenced that have, in this released report, Russia's involvement has been downgraded and India's involvement upgraded. That's publicly accessible in this report. We don't talk about the United States and how it's influenced Canadian politics over many, many years. We don't talk about other governments. Trips to other countries that are offered for free. Is there really a free lunch in politics? Do we just think this is what politicians get as a perk, free trips to other countries? I just think it's bad practice, and while we're tightening up the rules and looking at foreign influence and foreign interference, I think they should not be allowed.
What is most problematic about a member of parliament going on a trip that is sponsored by another country?
Do you want to talk to any of that? Look, it's now required, and it wasn't always required, under our code of ethics to report such trips. It's a publicly accessible registry, and people will know if their MP took a trip sponsored by the People's Republic of China or sponsored by India, to mention the governments that are already in the mix here. Why do foreign governments offer free trips to Canadian MPs? We now know for sure that foreign governments use many tactics and strategies and many approaches, including towards political staffers, including towards people they see as maybe up-and-coming rising stars in politics that someday might be able to do them a favor. They're building relationships. And while going to an open house or celebrating a national holiday at an embassy here in Ottawa and having a lovely time at a party offered by the diplomatic service of whether it's the United States or Norway is building a relationship. And I think a lot of those are healthy relationships. It's good to have a sense of the world. But a free trip is, to me, crossing a line. And I'm just speaking as myself. I don't take a free trip. I've gone on a sponsored trip and paid back the sponsor because I don't want to feel at any level beholden to any foreign interests ever. I do think seeing the world is great, but foreign governments offering free trips, I think they do it to curry favor and support within Canada from a select group of MPs. And I think it's a practice. It's just me. It isn't a recommendation coming out of the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, but I think we should look at it. I think it should be discouraged. For me, I think it should be banned.
What was the trip that you took that you paid back?
It was a trip in March of 2018, and I'm really proud of the work we did. The Canadian Palestinian Parliamentary Friendship Group managed to have MPs from 5 parties, 18 MPs, travel to the occupied territories. I learned a lot. The trip was sponsored by the Palestinian Authority, and I wasn't the only MP to pay back all of my costs, but I did, and I would not want to say who else went and who else didn't pay or whatever. I don't want to accuse any of my colleagues, but I just felt strongly about it.
So when you say all sponsored travel from any government, are you including Israel? You didn't specifically mention that country.
Yes, I didn't want to specifically mention Israel because, well, they're already in the report. But I'm looking at who sponsors travel a lot. Yes, Israel sponsors a lot of trips for Canadians. And I would certainly take one. I've been trying to organize it for some time, but I would pay them back.
So if you're not going to support this block motion, what do you think the next steps are for
Well, I tell you why.
accountability?
I'm sorry, but I should back up. Why I'm not supporting the block motion is that I think it's throwing a hot potato in the wrong soup pot. Madam Justice Hogue has a lot on her plate and short timelines. Her inquiry is not ideally suited to what the Canadian public needs to know now, which is to investigate for instance, the former MP mentioned on page 26. Somebody needs to do that. I don't think it's going to be Madam Justice Hogue. So we could go through the process of throwing it to the Hogue inquiry, knowing how overburdened they are to meet the deadlines they've got. And where would we be at the end of the day when she reports back? Probably where we are now, which is why I think it's better for parliamentarians to take responsibility for the hot potato, spend the time it takes, and for more of our colleagues, particularly leaders of other federal political parties who have access to the documents if they so choose to pursue it, and for us to try to work in a nonpartisan spirit. That's the worst part of the debate that's happened in the last, since this report came out, is, of course, everything that happens in Parliament is increasingly hyper-partisan. it doesn't help us come to solutions. So I think that throwing it to Madam Justice Hogue, we now have the Liberals supporting the block motion, the Conservatives support the block motion, everyone's going to support the block motion. I don't know what Mike's going to do, but I'm going to vote against it. I think it's performative without being substantive. It moves the issue along. It says, we're going to give this to Madam Justice Hogue. And I did see, and I'm aware that the chair of the committee, David McGinty, said, well, that's progress, that moves it somewhere. But I think we should take responsibility for this ourselves as parliamentarians, and I think it would be really ideal if all party leaders could sit down together and say, okay, what's the best thing to do now? We have a collective duty and loyalty to Canada and to the Canadian electorate to restore their confidence in what goes on in this place. And how do we do that? The more nonpartisan we can be, the better. And I do think that's possible. Every now and then I see it emerge when we speak as one because we care about an issue, we care about Canada. This is a very disturbing report, but I think if all the other party leaders had read the unredacted version, as I have, I think we might be able to have a reasonable, grown-up conversation about where do our obligations lie? Where does our duty lie? What could we do together for Canadians to sort this out? Could we go back to CSIS? Could we go back to sources? Could we push harder to say, and could we work with the committee to say, can we get these names out so Canadians know as much as we know about individuals and they can breathe a sigh of relief, as I did, in recognizing that there wasn't a big long list or even a tiny list. There's no list. And there's no one named as an MP who has deliberately sought to undermine Canada in favor of a different country. Can't say that more clearly, or I suppose I should be careful again about my notes, but it really is important to know that while a few named people may have been compromised by foreign influence, it falls far short of what could be considered disloyalty to Canada, demonstrated disloyalty to Canada.
Can I just really briefly, in the interest of not having any unnecessary secrets, I will be voting with Elizabeth on the block motion.
Oh, thanks.
This is about.
In the report.
I've not read the report, as you know. I've read the redacted version, and I just strongly agree with Elizabeth. This is actually about restoring trust in our democracy. I want to take the actions that best move us towards that, and I trust a person who has read the unredacted version. And if anything, I wish we had more time before the vote so that more of this information could be shared with other colleagues that might encourage them to do the same.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. No, that wasn't a joke or a bit of put-up sketch. It is against the Green Party policies and bylaws for the leader to whip votes. So no matter how much I might want Mike to vote with me, I don't push it. We try to talk ahead of votes to know, because we think sometimes it's very cool to vote the same way, but it doesn't happen all the time, and we don't worry about it because his job is to represent the voters of Kitchener Centre, and my job is to represent the voters of Saanich Gulf Islands, and it keeps the lines pretty clear.
What do you think is to be done about non-parliamentarians who are elected officials that you mentioned in the report? I mean, we have a federal motion for a federal inquiry, we have NSICOP, but as parliamentarians, like, I'm surprised they're talking about provincial or municipal. I don't know what tools we even have. What do you think we should do about that?
I'd like to talk to my other parliamentary colleagues about it. I'd like to talk to the committee about it. I am distressed by foreign interference at any part of Canadian democracy, in any aspects of our democracy, whether nomination races, leadership contests, or actual elections to office at different levels. I do think, knowing what I know now from reading that report, I'll be continually pushing myself within the limits of the Official Secrets Act and the fact that I can't speak of things without permission to figure that out, because I am very disturbed and I want to make sure that Canadians can have faith that anyone elected to office in this country at any one of the various parliaments or orders of government that are our democracy and our healthy body politic are 100% loyal to Canada.
Recognizing your concern about, not breaking that oath, I'm just curious if you could give us any more information about, like, provinces. How many provinces? Are we talking a handful? Is this widespread?
I would have to say that that was something that I didn't clear with PCO before speaking to it, so I'm going to have to decline to answer, but perhaps with further efforts I can get answers to that. And I'd certainly take note of it and see if I can get an answer to you. But it's the report in its public version speaks of provinces, so I haven't let anything out of the bag that wasn't there before.
It sounds like you're more concerned about what you read about provincial, municipal, other levels of government than what you read about what's happening here in Ottawa. Is that fair?
I'm concerned about any influence, and that it does include governments that may have compromised. And I use the word compromised in my statement, that there are some MPs who may have been compromised by foreign influence. And I am very concerned about what I've seen in other jurisdictions. And I wouldn't want to say one bothers me more than another. They're both unacceptable.
Influence on the media, foreign influence on the media.
That was a shocker to me, too. And that is referred to in the public version, where foreign governments have given special access to documentary films and want a very favorable view, and it's not disclosed. It's the surreptitious nature of it that's the problem. And I don't think, I have such respect for journalists that the idea that somebody would be, as a filmmaker or a documentary filmmaker or a journalist, willing to do. I mean, when you get your Saturday paper and there's extra pages, when this is how old I am, I'm still talking about newspapers, they're actual paper. Sponsored content is usually somewhere on the page when you start reading about a new face cream. It's usually somewhere there so you can see, this isn't news. And I was really shocked to the extent to which the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians have seen enough intelligence to think it's an issue that sponsored content is undisclosed. So that is another area to be investigated.
Back when you were talking about sponsored travel and Israel, I'm a bit confused. Were you saying that Israel is named in this report?
I did not say that. I specifically said it wasn't.
And in terms of sponsored content, is that like across all media, or I'm just wondering if this is specifically in like ethnic media? Is it like Chinese language media? Is it like...
That is not specified at any level in either the redacted or unredacted versions. It's a question of I think we have to, if we refocus a bit, which I think will help, focusing on what tools and tactics do foreign governments use? What's at their disposal? What are they looking for? Infiltrating, co-opting community organizations, infiltrating, co-opting journalists, infiltrating, co-opting elected people or people seeking to maybe be elected or nominated or become a party leader. So it's a question not so much of who don't we trust in Canada. I think that's the wrong lens. If we can shift it to we need to protect our democracy by better understanding what hostile foreign governments see as their targets. And it's basically a lot more aspects of our society than I would have imagined, including journalists.
Ms. May, you've been on Parliament Hill a long time.
Not really, not nearly long enough.
I'm glad you're
I'm
reading
only
newspapers.
70.
With sincerity.
Sorry, not me.
What is your greatest motivation coming here today? Are you trying to splash cold water on the call for names? Like what are you trying to achieve here?
I've been hearing from so many of my own constituents who are good and freaked out. I would describe myself before reading the report as good and freaked out. My main goal, and I don't want to sound too lofty, but I am a passionate lover of democracy. I am terrified that the gong show that is Parliament will result in fewer Canadians voting when they have the chance. I am worried for the health of our country if people decide politics is so disgusting in kind of a consumer response. I don't like that store. I'm not going to go in there and buy anything because that store is practicing voter. Democracy isn't shopping. Democracy is a right of Canadians, and voting is a duty. We don't talk about duty very much anymore. It's not a hobby, it's a duty. If Canadians end up feeling so unsure of the health of their democracy that they're either by being disgusted or hostile to, or if we fall to such a level of disrespect that people don't vote, then democracy is at risk. And if you look around the world, and I do look around the world, right-wing populism / fascism is on the rise. Protecting democracy is my main motivation. I think to protect the global climate, we need healthy democracy. You'll notice I'm probably the only person so far that I've noticed who's mentioned the role of foreign corporations. I do think we need to make sure that people aren't susceptible to too much money in politics. I really think we should bring back the per vote subsidy, just to throw that out there. There are tools, things we used to do that could address the threats that have been identified in the public version of this report. My main motivation, though, today is let's keep our eye on the ball. The ball is, what are foreign governments seeking to do in Canada? Not, is there a secret list of MPs somewhere that someone should release? Because there isn't one.
Do you think Bill C-70 is adequate for addressing any of your issues that you raised?
I wish, and I said this in Parliament yesterday on the floor of the House, I wish that in getting C-70 passed, we had not been so short of time, and I was so encouraged to see collaboration between the Conservatives and the NDP in coming up with a unanimous consent motion with Bloc and Liberals all supporting it. I wish we had not adopted an approach that went so fast that we're not hearing the voices of people who are saying, wait a minute, this could have a chilling effect. This could hurt civil liberties. C-70 and the way we've structured this bill could be improved with amendments. We don't have that. It's going to be gone. It's gone through clause by clause. My opportunity to provide amendments was limited. I have a very time-limited opportunity. I get a notice from committees, and Mike does, and we have less than 24 hours to produce amendments. And that generally happens before the witnesses have been finished. That's because of our status as a party with less than 12 members. And that particular bill went very, very fast. Just saying, I think C-70 is an improvement. We should have had a foreign influence registry a long time ago. And taking a deep breath, I wish we'd had it in a more timely fashion so that we could have had a normal process in this place with study and hearing witnesses and entertaining amendments. I wish we had not rushed through that process so quickly, but on balance, would I rather have C-70 as is without amendment than no C-70 at all? I'd rather have C-70 as it is, but I regret very much that we didn't have time to study it and improve it.
Can I offer just
Yeah, sure.
a brief example on that? If The decision was made differently not to carve out the capital gains tax as separate legislation for political gain. There would have been more House time to spend more time improving C70. I think that's what Elizabeth is getting at, that it's good legislation, but we heard just in the last few days from groups like NCCM about improvements they'd like to see, and as a result of that UC motion, it's moved so quickly that it's made it more difficult for parliamentarians to improve that legislation, despite the fact that there could have been more House time
Not
for
just more
it.
difficult, impossible. Sorry, Mike. I never heckle in the House, and now I'm heckling Mike. It was impossible to improve C70 because of the timeline. And honestly, obviously, it was unanimous consent. I could have said no and stopped it. And I apologize to the many groups that are raising solid, good points on civil liberties grounds that C70 probably C70 should have gone to committee after second reading for proper study and entertaining of amendments, as opposed to the truncated process we have because we're running out of time, because it's almost the end of the session, and because we're pushing things through fast. But as Mike says, if we weren't taking special time for essentially the show trial of the capital gains tax vote, we'd have more time for C70.
When I asked you about your motivation, you described the gong show.
Yeah.
Your quote, gong show.
Yes.
On Parliament Hill. I take it you're referring to as it pertains to the conversation on foreign interference. Why?
I'm sorry.
Just the general gong show.
It's in general. I wasn't specifying. No. I'm glad you clarified. It's just,
That's not the question.
yes. Okay.
The question is, as it relates to foreign interference, how would you describe the nature of the conversation? Does that amount to a quote gong show?
No. And thank you for asking the question. It's probably the last question, given that you probably all want to get cracking. I think when I speak of the gong show, I particularly mean the bad high school theater experience of debates in Parliament with people giving written speeches, the hoping to get a zinger line, clickbait clips for YouTube instead of respectful parliamentary debate, which is why we are here. I think it's pretty clear what we've seen, and everyone starts calling it silly season earlier and earlier every year. But since I was first elected in 2011, and it wasn't great then, things have become more disrespectful. The tone has become less civil. And I don't want to see our democracy slide into a Trumpian era. And that does not refer to the policies or politics of any particular party, to be very clear, but to what I think Donald Trump has done, which was open a box on conduct, language that would have been screamingly unacceptable in polite society even 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And Canadians, as I've said probably a zillion times, the thing I love about being Canadian more than anything, one of the things I love about being Canadian is our capacity to disagree without being disagreeable. And we've suffered a real psychic wound through pandemic. Coming out the other side, for whatever reason, we're having a harder time disagreeing without being disagreeable. And I think, again, for a healthy democracy, for higher voter turnout, for citizen engagement, for all of the reasons that we need to protect Canadian democracy, we need to get back to respectful discourse, and if at all possible, to kindness. Merci. À la prochaine. Thank you very much.